It's strange, isn't it? How silence, something we often associate with peace or calm, can become the loudest and most unbearable thing in a room. Since the day he left this world, our home hasn't been the same. The walls still stand, the furniture hasn't moved, but the atmosphere, it's changed. It's like the air itself remembers him. The way his laughter used to bounce down the hallway, lighting up even the dullest afternoons. Now that laughter is gone, replaced by an echo that feels empty and unfinished. There's a kind of stillness that settles into places once filled with love, and it lingers, quietly reminding me of everything that used to be. Before we dive deeper into this story, I just want to ask, if you're here, if you're listening, please like this video and subscribe. Truly helps more than you know. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Each of your shares is not only a motivation for us but also contributes to spreading value to the community. Every night, I find myself drawn to the same place, the edge of our bed. It's become a ritual. The sheets still hold the shape of his body, not physically, but in the way fabric remembers the weight of a person who once returned to it every night. I sit there and for a few minutes, I let myself believe he's just stepped out for a moment, that maybe he'll walk through the door like he used to, keys jangling and eyes full of stories. But I know better. Grief doesn't let you live in fantasy for long. Finds you. It doesn't knock. It seeps in slowly, melts into your bones, until your very heartbeat feels like it's dragging sorrow with every thud. I didn't think I'd ever feel again. Not truly. Not joy. Not wonder. Not that soft, unfamiliar flutter that catches you off guard and steals your breath. I thought my heart had closed its doors for good. And yet, in the quiet, in the spaces where his absence echoes the loudest, something unexpected began to stir. A different presence. Familiar, yes, someone who had been in my life for years, but now there was a shift. A subtle current between us that hadn't existed before. Or maybe it had and I just hadn't seen it. Something was beginning to change. And I couldn't help but wonder. What if this wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of another chapter? His eyes, they had changed. Or maybe it was mine that had. Sometimes I wonder if the shift started in him or if it happened in me first. If it was something subtle like the way shadows move when the light changes, quiet but undeniable. It didn't begin with grand gestures or dramatic moments. No, it started with glances. Not the casual kind you toss out in passing. Not the friendly, familiar looks of old friends or acquaintances. These were different. They lingered. They had weight. These were glances that didn't just land on you. They settled into your skin, made your breath hitch before you even understood why. I remember one moment so clearly it's like it's etched into my memory. I had looked up and caught him watching me. But not watching in the way people watch. This was noticing. There was a softness in his gaze, but also something intent, like he wasn't just seeing what I looked like, but rather who I was. And in that moment I realized. He wasn't the same boy I remembered. He had grown, not just in height or age, but into something more grounded. He had stepped out from the edges of my memories and was quietly making a home in my present. There was something unspoken in the way he moved now, in how he carried himself. Less hesitant, more sure. I hadn't realized how often he'd been around, how seamlessly he had woven himself into the corners of my days. Little things stood out more now. The timbre of his voice when he laughed, the way he paused before speaking, as though choosing his words mattered more than before. And then one morning it happened. Something shifted again, something I couldn't ignore. I walked into the kitchen, not expecting anything out of the ordinary, and there he was. Already there, already moving like he belonged. He was making coffee, as if he had done it 100 times before, sunlight spilling through the window and draping itself across his face like it had chosen him. His hair was tousled like he'd just rolled out of bed, and his shirt sleeves were casually pushed up, revealing the kind of ease you can't fake. He looked up and smiled. And it wasn't just a smile. It was the smile. The kind that makes you forget what you were doing. The kind that pulls you out of your thoughts and leaves you standing still in a doorway with your heart beating in unfamiliar ways. In that second I realized something had changed between us, and maybe, just maybe, it had been changing for a while. Was that really all it was? A pause that lingered a breath too long, a glance that held just a touch more warmth than it should have. It would have been easy to dismiss, to brush it off as coincidence or imagination. Just tricks of the mind in a house too quiet, in a heart still learning how to beat without breaking. And yet, there was something there. Something in the stillness between words. In the silence that didn't feel empty, but full, charged. We never said anything out loud. Not then. Words seemed too fragile, too dangerous, like they might shatter whatever unspoken thread had begun to wind between us. But when he handed me the mug that morning, fingers grazing mine, barely, just the gentlest brush, I felt it. Jolt. Flicker. The kind that comes before a storm. My pulse skipped, just once, like my body had caught a message my mind wasn't ready to translate. Could have meant nothing. But in a heart dulled by grief, even the smallest spark feels like thunder. I didn't look at him. Couldn't. But I knew. I knew he had felt it too. That stillness between us wasn't empty. It was waiting, touching, growing. The days that followed felt like walking through fog threaded with electricity. Nothing changed, and yet everything did. The way he lingered a second longer in doorways, like he wasn't quite ready to leave. The way he offered to help with the smallest tasks, things I didn't need help with, things I normally handled without thought. And then there were the conversations. Light at first, easy. How was your day? Did you sleep well? But somehow, I found myself answering more honestly than I intended. Telling him things I hadn't told anyone. Not in months, maybe not ever. There was something different in his voice too. A steadiness, a softness. Kindness, yes, but beneath that something quieter. Something unspoken that trembled beneath every word. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't inappropriate. And yet, it felt like standing just a little too close to a fire. One that hadn't yet burned you but could. One that made you want to lean in, even knowing the risk. Then came that evening. The sky had turned dusky lavender. The kind of fading light that makes the world feel hushed. We were on the porch, sitting side by side as the wind stirred the trees around us. There was jasmine in the air or something like it. A scent that felt tangled in memory, in something old and unnameable. We didn't talk much. There was no need. Just the occasional rustle of leaves, the creak of the porch swing, and the quiet rhythm of shared silence. His hand rested on the bench between us, not touching mine but close. So close that the space between felt alive. And I thought if I just moved, just an inch, just a breath. So I did, just slightly. And that tiny shift felt like crossing a line I hadn't even known was there. Our fingers never touched. Not exactly. But the space between them was alive, charged, humming with something unspeakable. It was like the universe had paused in that tiny distance, holding its breath. A question hung there in the space between us. What if? I could feel the pull of it. Not just the physical nearness of him, but the gravity of the moment. As if every choice I'd made up until now had quietly led to this quiet, breathless pause. He turned to me slowly, like he was afraid too sudden a movement might break whatever delicate thread had formed. His voice was soft, careful. "You've been quiet lately," he said. I gave the smallest nod. "It's just, everything still feels different." And it did. The kind of different that doesn't always announce itself but lingers beneath the surface, shifting the way you see familiar things. The house, the light, the sound of another person's voice. He looked at me, really looked. Not just a glance, but a gaze that held steady, like he was trying to find something in me that even I had forgotten how to see. "Different doesn't always mean bad," he said. The words landed softly, like they were meant to comfort, but they carried weight. I wanted to respond, to say something, anything that would capture what I felt in that moment. But I couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere behind the lump forming in my throat. His gaze didn't waver, and in it, I saw everything we hadn't spoken aloud. Quiet ache, the flickers of something new, the grief that still shadowed us both. His eyes weren't demanding or expectant. They were open, steady, kind. There was a softness there, a rare kind of unguarded tenderness that made me want to lean in. Not to close a distance, but to see, was the warmth real? Could something that gentle really be meant for me? "I miss him," I whispered. My voice broke, the words cracking under the weight they'd carried for so long. He leaned in, not enough to overwhelm, but enough to be felt. Enough to remind me I wasn't sitting in that ache alone. "I miss him too," he said quietly. "But I see you. And you don't have to carry everything by yourself." That did it. The lump in my throat swelled, and I had to blink back the sting in my eyes. I didn't cry, but I came close. For a second, I wanted to rest my head on his shoulder, just to feel someone else holding the weight. I didn't. I stayed still. But the thought lingered like a hand resting just above my skin. The next few weeks moved like a quiet song playing in the background of an almost normal life. Soft, careful, but filled with little notes of something shifting. He started bringing me things. Tiny offerings that meant more than they should have. Flowers from the garden, arranged clumsily but with thought. My favorite snacks from the corner store, left on the kitchen counter without a word. Tools quietly taken out and used to fix loose door hinges, squeaky cabinets. Things I'd learned to live with but never asked anyone to help with. Me. I started noticing things I hadn't let myself feel before. The way my chest fluttered just slightly when he walked into a room. The way my breath caught when he smiled without realizing it. I waited for guilt to come or shame. But it didn't. What came instead was quieter, gentler. Like hope wrapped in hesitation. Then came the rain. It started suddenly, heavy and fast, with clouds rolling in before we even realized. We were both outside, trying to grab the laundry before it got soaked. He shouted something, probably a warning or maybe just my name, and we were running, arms full of half-damp clothes, tripping over the wet grass. We laughed, genuine breathless laughter that tumbled out like we hadn't done it in years. The kind that made your cheeks ache and your heart feel too big for your chest. Water streamed down our faces, our hair stuck to our skin, and our shirts clung to us like the moment was trying to hold on. And for a heartbeat, it didn't feel like grief. It didn't feel like loss. Felt like being alive again. By the time we got inside, we were drenched and breathless. I looked at him and he looked at me. Something passed between us. Something wordless and powerful. My clothes clung to my skin, and his eyes lingered for a second longer than they should have. But it wasn't desire in them. It was longing, the kind that comes from holding back. I turned away, pretending to busy myself with the laundry. He stepped closer, not touching but near enough that I could feel his warmth behind me. I didn't move. "You look beautiful," he said, voice low and barely audible above the rain. Froze. My heart thundered. I wanted to ask why he said that. I wanted to ask what he meant. But I knew. Deep down I knew. Turned slowly. His face was calm, but his eyes were stormy. I could see the conflict there. The struggle between what was right and what was real. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," I said before I could stop myself. He stepped back, giving me space. Giving me time. "I just want you to know you're not invisible. Not to me." That night I couldn't sleep. His words played over and over in my head. I wasn't invisible. Not to him. And somehow that meant more than I could admit. The next day I found him sitting by the window, sketching. I didn't know he drew. I asked if I could see, and he hesitated before turning the book around. It was me. Not in an obvious way. It wasn't about likeness. It was about feeling. The curve of a shoulder, the way the light fell on the side of a face. He had drawn me the way I felt when I used to be loved. As if someone had memorized my softness and wanted to keep it safe. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. But I sat beside him. Closer this time. Close enough that our arms touched, and I didn't move away. Days bled into nights. Each one bringing us closer to a line neither of us wanted to cross, but neither of us could ignore. He became my quiet, my comfort. And maybe I became his reason to stay. One evening, I couldn't take the weight of silence anymore. "Do you think it's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, startled. What this? Whatever it is we're not saying. He sighed, resting his elbows on his knees. It's not wrong to care. It's not wrong to feel something. But I don't want to hurt you, or confuse you. You've lost so much. I nodded, my throat tight. But I'm still here. And I feel alive again. Because of you. He turned to me slowly. Then let's just be here. Together. No promises, no expectations. Just here. And in that moment the world felt quiet again. But this time not in mourning. This time in peace. There was something sacred in the way the days passed after that conversation. He didn't rush anything, and neither did I. But everything felt more intentional. Every glance, every word, every shared silence held weight. We didn't call it love. But in all the quiet ways that mattered, it was growing between us, like ivy climbing through the cracks of our hearts. Some evenings we cooked together. He would stand beside me, offering help he knew I didn't need, reaching for spices that were already within my grasp, lingering near my shoulder longer than necessary. And I would pretend not to notice, though my heart beat faster with every passing moment. The kitchen became our sanctuary, filled with the clatter of utensils and the hum of something we didn't dare name. One night as we prepared dinner, I dropped a spoon. We both reached for it at the same time. Our hands collided and we froze. His fingers gently brushed mine as he picked it up, and for the first time he didn't pull away. His touch lingered, soft like a question waiting to be answered. I think about you, he said suddenly, as if the words had been bottled up for too long. I looked at him, startled. Not in a way that disrespects what we've lost, he continued, but in a way that honors what could still be found. My breath caught. There was nothing improper in his voice, only honesty, only hope. I looked away, afraid that meeting his gaze might make my heart betray its steady rhythm. I don't know what this is, I whispered. He stepped a little closer. It doesn't have to be anything yet. I just want to be near you. And if that's all it ever is, that's still enough. That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, my mind circling around his words. I hadn't expected him to say it, but once he did, I couldn't unhear it. I couldn't unknow the way my body reacted when he entered the room, or the way my soul leaned toward his without permission. The seasons began to shift. Autumn colored the trees outside with hues that mirrored the slow burn I felt inside. We spent more time together without needing excuses. Late walks in the neighborhood, sharing books, listening to old records in the quiet of the living room. The house that once felt too big for one heart now felt full again. But it was a different kind of fullness. Gentle, healing, slow. One afternoon, a neighbor dropped by unexpectedly. She glanced at us sitting together and raised a curious brow. Later she sent me a message, short, sharp, and filled with quiet judgment. She didn't need to say much. The implication was clear. I stared at her words, my chest tightening. The world didn't understand, and maybe it never would. But that didn't mean what I felt was wrong. Still, doubt slipped in like a chill draft through a cracked window. That night I grew distant. I avoided his gaze, kept conversations brief. He noticed, of course he did. He always noticed. He found me in the garden the next morning, pulling at weeds that didn't need to be pulled. Did I do something? He asked softly. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. He stepped closer. Then why do you look at me like I'm someone you're trying to forget? I turned toward him, heart heavy, because it would be easier if I could. He didn't speak for a moment. When he finally did, his voice was steady. I don't want to be easy. I want to be real. And just like that, the walls I'd started to rebuild crumbled again. I stepped toward him, just a little, close enough to feel the warmth between us. The sun was peeking through the trees, casting golden patterns on his skin. He looked at me the way one looks at a painting you're afraid to touch. Full of awe, full of care. I think I'm afraid, I whispered. He nodded. So am I. But I'd rather be afraid with you than safe without you. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to be held. not with arms, but with presence, with the steadiness of someone who wasn't asking for anything more than this moment. Later that evening, as we sat on the porch, I leaned into him just a little. My shoulder brushed his, and I didn't pull away. Neither did he. The silence stretched, soft and familiar. "Do you remember that night it rained?" "Yes." He smiled. "I think about it all the time." "So do I admitted. It was the first time I felt something again." He turned to me, eyes searching mine. "And now?" I looked down, then up at him. "Now I feel everything." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out slowly, gently, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers barely grazed my skin, but my entire body reacted as if he'd touched something deeper than flesh. The world around us seemed to fade. No past, no future, just now. Eventually, he stood and reached for my hand. "Come with me." I followed him through the house, up the stairs, into the attic. He had transformed the space. Soft light strung from the beams, books stacked neatly beside a cozy chair, and a small table with tea already waiting. "I've been working on something," he said, picking up a notebook. He hesitated before handing it to me. "It's about you. About us. Not a story, just pieces of moments." I opened the notebook with careful hands, the worn edges and creased spine hinting that it had been touched often, carried, maybe even cherished. The pages were filled with his handwriting, uneven in places, sometimes messy, as if the thoughts had come too quickly for the pen to keep up. There were no fancy turns of phrase, no literary polish. But what I found, there was something far more powerful: honesty. His words weren't dressed up or trying to impress. They bled. Raw, vulnerable lines that spoke of loss, of quiet battles, of nights spent staring at the ceiling trying to make sense of a heart that no longer beat the way it used to. He wrote about grief like it was a person, a shadow that had followed him into every room. But woven between the sorrow was something else, something unexpected. He wrote about beauty, not the kind found in sunsets or poetry, but in ordinary things. A hand resting on a table, laughter breaking through silence, the shape of someone's shadow as they walked away, and more importantly when they came back. And then there was her. A woman, unnamed but unmistakably familiar. A woman who, without even realizing it, had begun to mend something in him. Someone who had breathed life back into the corners of his soul he thought were permanently dimmed. Someone who didn't try to save him, but did anyway, just by being herself. I stopped reading. The words blurred as emotion swelled in my chest. I closed the notebook gently, as though afraid the pages might spill over. My hands trembled slightly as I held it, heart beating just a little too fast, a little too loud. I looked up at him, standing there not far from me. His expression unreadable but open. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He took a slow breath, like he'd been waiting for this question, like it mattered more than he knew how to say. "Because I want you to know that I see you," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "Not just as someone who was loved once, but as someone still worthy of being cherished." The words hit me like a wave, unexpected and impossible to brace against. My throat tightened. Tears pressed at the corners of my eyes, threatening to rise even as I tried to keep them back. My instincts told me to speak, to respond, to fill the moment with something. But before I could, he stepped in gently, adding with a softness that cut right through me. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." And there was freedom, not pressure. Understanding, not expectation. He had handed me his heart in the form of a few unpolished pages and asked for nothing in return. I stood there for a moment, notebook clutched to my chest, unsure of what to do with the swell of feeling inside me. Grief, gratitude, something else that felt frighteningly close to hope. Then I moved. Without planning to, without overthinking it, I stepped forward and into him, wrapping my arms gently around his waist. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simple, instinctive. A gesture that said more than words could. He stiffened in surprise, just for a heartbeat, like he hadn't expected me to choose closeness. But then he exhaled, and I felt the change in him as he melted into the embrace. His arms circled around me, warm and sure, and we stood like that, quiet, still, wrapped in something too big to name. In that silence, our hearts did the talking. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken. Felt held. That night, I lay awake in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling as shadows danced gently across it in the soft glow of the hallway light. It was a familiar position, one I had assumed too many times to count. But tonight felt different. I wasn't haunted by silence anymore. I wasn't tracing the absence of a voice, or the shape of grief that used to curl around me like a second skin. Instead, I found myself held, not physically but emotionally, by the quiet awareness that someone was still downstairs. Someone who wasn't just staying under the same roof, but who had slowly and tenderly carved out space in the fragile corners of my life. Someone who had become more than a familiar presence, more than a friend. Someone who had waited, not with pressure, not with expectation, but with the kind of patience that only comes from truly seeing another person. He had waited for my heart to stop surviving and start remembering how to feel again. Over the next few days, something subtle but powerful shifted between us. It wasn't marked by a dramatic confession or a sudden change. It was quieter than that, gentler. We stopped pretending. We no longer danced around the space between us, no longer hesitated with our words or second-guessed the little ways we reached for each other. We still moved carefully, but the care wasn't fear anymore. It was respect, understanding. We didn't need to explain it. Not to each other. We knew the world outside wouldn't understand. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But within the walls of this home, we'd created something sacred. A space where healing didn't mean forgetting. A space where laughter could return without guilt, where grief was allowed to remain, but no longer took up all the room. It sat in the background, quiet and acknowledged, while life began to bloom again in the foreground. We found comfort in shared silences, in passing glances that lingered just a second longer, in the way our shoulders brushed when we both reached for the same dish, and neither of us pulled away. We found a rhythm, a new kind of normal. One morning we sat together in the attic, an old space we'd started to reclaim. Dust motes swirled through the sunbeams that poured in through the slanted window, and the scent of old wood and chamomile tea filled the air. We didn't talk much, just sipped our tea, listened to the distant hum of the world below us, and let the quiet settle like a blanket. Then he turned to me, his voice low but steady. "Can I ask you something?" I glanced over, my heart already curious. "Of course." He hesitated, not nervously but thoughtfully, as if the words mattered more than usual. "If things were different, if life had given us a different path, do you think we still would have found each other?" The question sat between us like a spark, flickering softly, waiting. I looked at him, really looked, at the man who had once been just a part of the background of my life, and now felt like the very center of something I hadn't known I needed. My heart was full in a way that had nothing to do with forgetting the past, and everything to do with honoring it while letting something new grow beside it. "I think," I said slowly, "that some connections, they don't rely on circumstance. They find a way, no matter the path, even if it takes a while." He nodded at that, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips, and then, without speaking, he reached for my hand. The movement was simple, unassuming, but it carried weight. This time I didn't hesitate. I let my fingers slip between his, and as they settled there, warm and certain, I felt the quietest sense of peace wash over me. Not because everything made sense, but because, for the first time in a long time, it didn't have to. Thank you for staying with us. If you find it interesting and useful, please subscribe, like and share so you don't miss the next video. Thanks.